Hey everyone, this is Dave March, and we are streaming live through StreamYard for the Land of Confusion show. I screwed up and I gave Flickr the wrong time, so he'll probably show up right at the end of the stream. But today we have Geezerbob here interviewing him, and I'll be, and his wife just kind of appeared in the background, and we'll be interviewing him about stuff. And we've just been talking about Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. So have you been a lifelong science fiction fan?
Well, I wouldn't say in my infancy, but yeah, ever since I was at least in junior high, that's pretty much where I discovered it. But I can remember reading Heinlein in Boy's Life back in the early 50s when he was publishing stuff. And of course, Boy's Life was that Boy Scout magazine or Boy Scout related magazine that was popular back then. And the series of books that are described as his juveniles were what he wrote there, like what would be Podcane on Mars and others, Trouble with Tribbles, a few of those things. And all along, it's a split between sci-fi and things like Patrick O'Brien or Hornblower series, things like that. They've either got to be scientific or history related, I guess.
Well, it does look like Flickr is showing up in the bottom of my screen here, but he's still got to figure out how to get his camera or his microphone attached to his computer. So that's those who've been here before on the show know that this is not a problem for you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I can't, for some reason, I can't do my camera.
Okay.
I'll keep, unless you know a way to do it. It says that when I try to click on it, it mutes me, and it says that it can't access my camera. I don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. I went into settings on my Windows 10, but it doesn't seem to. Oh, by the way, hi.
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll poke around there. StreamYard. Not working. StreamYard camera not working.
Yeah. Funny. Let me try just looking in the camera. You're recording this now? Yes.
Yeah, we are live.
Okay.
No, there's no one in the chat. So, but. Yeah, so we were just talking about, Franco is someone named Franco is in the chat. So great here. So we do have someone watching at home.
Very good.
Anyways, so we were just talking about Heinlein and science fiction. So what about Arthur C. Clarke?
All right.
Sorry, Robert.
Yes.
I was asking you what was how about Arthur C. Clarke? Were you into him as well, or was this more American?
I pretty much read all of the major authors. Andre Norton was another one. Arthur C. Clarke, Asimov, Heinlein. Take your pick. It was a good period because I'm talking about like into the 70s and even into the 80s. I subscribed to Campbell's analog science fiction for a long time. But there was a point at which I'll tell you where I kind of began to lose interest. I had not seen, this is sometime in the 80s, I had not seen analog for a while. I picked up a copy of it and I started reading one of the stories. And essentially the story as I remember it, some guy is sent out as a troubleshooter to find out why somebody's spaceship blew up. Okay. And the way he's described it, this guy's floating around inside this damaged vessel, and here comes some body parts floating along, an eyeball and such. And you just know at that point the guy is writing a script for a movie he hopes to pitch to Hollywood. And I think once Hollywood latched on to sci-fi, then that really began to affect the way most of the writers wrote. So I think the last serious things I read most of the Dune series, also some prequels to Dune that I found while I was in Greece, curiously in a Greek bookstore. There are three very, very thick. Yeah, my other half is departing. Wave goodbye. Anyway, they were, it was like House Atreides, House Harkonnen.
Okay, you read the House series. I didn't read those series, but
Yeah.
I'm familiar. I read his. They had a series based on the Butlerian Jihad. So that's Frank Herbert's son is the one
Right.
writers on that.
Right.
So Franco, Robert's handle on Ricochet is Geezerbob.
Yeah.
So I found them okay, but I just didn't think they were Dune books. Was my experience with reading that.
Well, they were well enough written, but yeah, definitely I don't think he would be able to replicate the style. But they killed a few weeks for me. So. And then the other last one I read, what was his name? Footfall.
Oh, Jerry Purnell and Larry
Jerry
David.
Purnell, right. Right. I one time emailed him kind of querying if he had thought about the idea of reflectors to fend off the laser rays the aliens had, and he was kind of miffed at the thought. They said yes, but that wouldn't do for the story,
You got him. I'm actually convention buddies with his son is the best way to describe it. I met him, his son Phil, on a number of occasions at this particular convention we go to, and I was one of. I also wrote Jerry several times on things, and was one of his many hundreds of pen pals. And he used to have this saying: he worries that he's going to end up like H.P. Lovecraft, slowly starving to death while slowly writing all his fan mail, answering all his fan mail.
Yeah, he was good. That was a good novel. That one I liked a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, there's a technical problem with the reflection idea. It's how intense is that weapon, and can your mirror handle it? But anyway.
Yeah, you would. It could potentially melt, but I would think it would provide some protection from diffraction.
Or maybe just temporary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they certainly had some other ideas in that book on how to handle things. I would love for that to be made into a movie instead of a lot of the other stuff we see get made into movies.
I think that one would have possibilities.
Mm-hmm. He did say in one of his posts once that he had at the stream. He's still there, Flicker?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening. It's interesting.
Okay, so sorry,
I've been fiddling with my stuff, and and every time I touch Start Cam, it unmutes me. So it currently drops me out.
Well, why don't we just go with it for now, and we'll try and figure it out in post.
Sure.
So, anyways, you have some questions for our guest?
Oh, well, my questions are probably not about science fiction. It's probably about how did you travel around the world, and what did you see? Who did you go with, and what did you learn? But
well, for a modest fee, you can subscribe to my travel newsletter, which is free, and find out all about it. Actually, of course, my wife, whom you saw briefly there, is native Greek. We met in college, married. We've been married 52 years, and of course, we had to make the trip back home. That was the first time I had really gotten out of the country, except for British Columbia, which doesn't count because that's Northern California. And I was working for a company that's still located here in Fresno that's makes what's called ancillary equipment. I don't know what it's kind of morphed into by now because microwave systems are not the big deal they were back then. But we were making ancillary equipment for microwave systems, meaning equipment that monitors the status. You can have a monitor anything you can provide a contact closure for example. The company that became our biggest customer was one up in Palo Alto called Granger Associates. They were making 960 megahertz radios, which weren't something that they could sell in the US. I don't know why they didn't have others, but so their customers were literally all over the world. I traveled South America, Jamaica, East Africa, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, all his business trips, field support for these things. I had done most of the design, but I was kind of the only guy available. And besides, I had a passport. So in '73, I went to Venezuela. '74, I think we went to Alaska, then out to Mississippi where they had a different company's equipment, and that's a fun expedition all in itself. And if you've experienced lightning in Mississippi, you might have an idea what I'm talking about. So that was the thing that got most of the travel. Since then, since I've retired, now we have a home in Greece. We go there, spend 2 or 3 months each year. And from there, we have been able to take tours from Greece to mainly to Europe. We've been to Italy, Spain, Portugal, Poland, Austria, Hungary, so forth. So, one way or another, we get around.
That sounds wonderful. It really does.
Yeah.
Nice that we can do it, really.
What I was going to say is that, so what happens with you? How do you protect your home the other 9 months of the year? I guess is the way to describe it.
Well, as it happens, essentially we had been leaving it empty, but it's on the 4th floor or 5th floor of a building, okay. kind of a condo arrangement. So access to it is not easy. But my wife's nephew has been living there while we're gone, and he takes very good care of the place. So it works out. Everything is in great shape when we get there, and we give it back to him in the same condition. So,
is Greek food different than Greek food in the United States?
Yes and no. This is interesting. The first thing that you run into when you're talking about Greek food, you're looking at what is typically family style dining. You go to a restaurant in Greece, most of the time it'll be family style. We are located in a suburb of Thessaloniki called Piraeus, and we're about 100 feet or so from the beach. And all up and down this beach, which stretches for 3 or 4 miles, there are these small restaurants. They all have the same menu. It's the calamari, octopodi, the fish, and so forth, and they all serve family style. So and of course, you don't get that here. Greek restaurants here are kind of Americanized because they serve the individual meals that we're used to. Generally speaking, the good Greek restaurants, you have to go to Chicago generally to find them, or New York. I don't know what's in Atlanta, but generally speaking, they're good, but it's just not the same style. You don't get the same feeling. And you don't get the Cipro either.
Don't get the what?
It's called Cipro. It's you've heard of ouzo, I would suppose. Okay, ouzo is a kind of anise flavored liqueur, pretty strong. Sapporo is its gorilla cousin. I mean,
Just one after dinner, yes.
yeah, that one will knock you on your can real easy.
Okay. So what was it like during COVID there for the few months that were there? I've seen some.
Well, of course, last year, of course, we didn't get to go at all. We didn't go at all last year. This year, it was good. It's kind of almost back to normal. There were mask requirements, usually in stores. You go into a grocery store or anything like that, you have to wear a mask. But then you're dining out. It's you sit down there, nobody's with masks. A lot of people on the streets. I've got a lot of pictures of people on the streets. I don't know if you looked me up on Facebook, but I posted one there. We spent a week in Athens for an AHEPA convention, and you go down to the Plaza, which is the kind of the tourist section of town, and everybody's running around having a good old time like normal. Go back to the hotel, and here's this empty lobby with people 60 feet apart wearing masks. And so generally speaking, it wasn't bad. They were not rigid about it. So for the most part, it was okay.
The people in the hotel, are they foreigners or are they locals? The ones with the masks 60 feet apart?
Well, I would say in general, the locals would wear a mask where masks were required as much as anybody else. In the hotel, I'm sure most of them were foreigners. This was the Hilton that we stayed at. Nice hotel, but it must have been pretty empty because we never saw very many people in the lobby or down in the dining room for breakfast. No.
I see.
We have a question from the chat. What are some of your favorite places that you've been to?
Some of my favorite places, probably Spain. We went to Spain, I think 4 or 5 years ago, and I was just blown away by it. And it's much more modern than you might expect. Very sophisticated, a lot of good food. I mean, if you're going to travel for food, go to Spain. Forget France, go to Spain. It's great. But Spain, Portugal after that. 2 years ago, we went to Poland. That was very good. Those were probably the best trips we've taken, except China. China was a different deal, and that's a whole nother class of food.
Okay.
Oh, I'm just thinking of peanuts. I never thought of Chinese food as having peanuts. Do you consider that to be? Have you had Chinese dishes heavy in peanuts?
Trying to think if we had anything that was a peanut dish. I think that's probably more down in southern parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. I don't recall anything in particular in China. The one thing that was good, we went in 2017, I think it was. Took a tour with an outfit that specializes in small groups. There were 12 of us in the group. We had a tour leader who was very conversant with the whole situation, knew where all the good restaurants were. I mean, this group, these tours were arranged such that you could literally go without a cent in your pocket, and everything was provided because all the meals were included in the price, all the travel, all the tips, everything. We just did not have to mess with money at all, unless you wanted to buy souvenirs or something like that.
Yeah, I've definitely had like Chinese food where maybe there were peanuts in it, but it's always been like something like almonds and other nuts mixed together in a salad or something. So it wasn't like I've never seen like a especially peanut Chinese dish.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a big thing. There
Well,
may be, but
yeah, it's just that my wife and I were in Beijing once, and we generally we don't go with tours, and we just wander the streets, and we stopped at a local restaurant that didn't speak any. Well, nobody spoke English back in '98, but they tried. But you know, I was really surprised. We ordered a meal, and mine came with was sort of like pad thai almost, but it was Chinese in a Chinese restaurant. So I just thought that was weird.
yeah, could well be. Yeah, how did you handle the language problem?
Uh, well, we really only spoke English. Uh, with just about everybody at the bazaars. I bought some wonderful Hugo Boss ties and just top brand name neckties for 28 cents a piece
Hmm.
on the streets, and so they understood English numbers. The only places that I had to speak English to understand were in the hotels, and they were actually fairly good, generally fairly good at English. The first hotel, I couldn't understand what the lady at the desk was saying, and she kept talking about a deposit of, I don't know, $30 or $300, and so we decided, well, we don't want to pay a deposit for any reason, so we changed hotels and we went to another hotel, and there the manager or the concierge or whatever behind the desk took us up to a suite and charged us some, I think $500 a night or something like that. And we really didn't want to pay it. And so she ended up, we kept saying, no, 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 thank you, no, thank you. And she got the manager, and the manager kept saying, kept coming down in price and saying, for you tonight, for 5 nights, for you tonight, right now. And he kept coming down until I think we got to something like $80 a night, and we just finally couldn't turn it down. And then years later, I read in Lonely Planet that they expected you to haggle over hotel prices.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was watching this show, this guy who lived in China for years, and he says, yeah, you have to haggle everything down to the lowest price. And if you really want to have fun, be the first person that shows up at a place, and you can really haggle them down low, because they consider it bad luck for the first customer to walk away without something. So you can really rake them over the coals. But yeah, that's what they expect. They expect you. They start off really high, and you bargain them down to the $80 you should be paying.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that actually, I've noticed that in Thailand and Laos as well.
Oh yeah,
it used to be that way too. That's the thing. We used to be that way, and then the 19th century, really, and the early 20th century, we decided to get away from that and standardize everything, so we don't haggle over anything. So we're no longer used to it. But we used to be that way. I understand Muslims are definitely that way still, but like, we're not used to bargaining over everything the way we would have, like our ancestors 200 years ago would completely understand you have to haggle over everything.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I asked about the language is I got the impression that it could be very difficult to travel around China if you only speak English, especially only English. Uh, English speakers were not common there. You could find people, but it could be a lot more difficult. Probably in a place like Beijing, where there'd be a lot of tourists, that would be different. But one thing we did notice is how much the Chinese themselves have gone out and become tourists. Probably 90% of the people we saw were Chinese.
Yeah.
Which speaks to how much they have modernized. Their government is still an authoritarian whipcracker, but on the surface, it just seems like it's a normal place with Chinese people.
Yeah. My memory was that we in, I think it was '98, we were there, and they had just that year closed roadways, most roadways to bicycles and and we're only allowing automobiles. So everybody was learning to drive an automobile. It's the first place I ever actually witnessed an automobile accident where two cars just didn't want to give way. And, so I guess I saw a more primitive China, I suppose.
Yeah, it has been largely since then the modernization has come. Now, I don't recall really seeing any bicycles on the road in particular.
Yeah.
So yeah, China is starting to close down a bit, sadly. So those you guys kind of are lucky now that you got those experiences. It doesn't sound like some of us will be able to get those experiences anymore.
Yeah, we seem to have a habit of going places just before the war starts. So,
so when you fly, do you have to wear a mask? Because that's what's really keeping me trapped in Guam, is that 36 hours with a mask on without being able to take it off is just impossible for me. I can't.
We definitely had to wear a mask all the way. I sympathize because I had a mask on about 24 hours, and it just about sawed my ears off. You know, those straps around the ears were really beginning to get irritating. What was particularly annoying when we left in June, and I had, of course, been checking the airline information and such, and they were saying, "Oh, you have to have an N95 mask. That's the only one they'll allow." So I dutifully went out and got N95 masks. We get on the airplane. They say, "Oh, you don't. Those are no good. Here, hey, take these." And they hand us the typical blue surgical mask. Go figure.
Well,
yeah,
nobody's.
Sorry, I was going to say that the N95 are the best ones, and I don't understand why they don't want them on airplanes.
But they don't. They have to be fitted. They literally have to be fitted for them to work. And I have a beard anyway, so even when I had to wear N95s for work, it was just a joke.
Yes, I know. About the only thing you need is the full hazmat gas mask kind of affair.
I've been thinking of getting those just for fun.
Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother, is a notorious, doesn't believe in the masks, and they made him wear one so he would walk around with his father's World War II gas mask.
It's about the way I feel sometimes. I'm just about done with masks.
My understanding is that it depends on the flight. So if you're flying American Airlines, they're going to make you do it. If you're flying Air Canada, they're going to make you do it. If you fly Lufthansa or someone else, they're not going to do it, especially over international waters.
Well, we flew Lufthansa going out, and Swiss and Lufthansa coming back, and United. So
okay,
they did require it on all, but they weren't really rigid about it.
Yeah.
What was United like? Because I've seen films of United and American airlines where they apparently kicked this woman off of they landed the plane to kick a woman off because she came out of the bathroom without her mask on. And I guess, I don't know if this was the third time they'd warned her or what, but they seem to be, from what I've been hearing, they're pretty strict about it. You didn't sense
they can be, and I guess it just depends on the crew you get. I would pull mine down below my nose because I just get so clogged up. I can hardly breathe sometimes, and every once in a while they'd remind me, "Oh, pull your mask up, pull your mask up." So I'd pull it up for a while and then pull it down again. But I never got any real flack about it. The only United flight was a Chicago to Fresno flight. It was kind of a late night thing. It was only about half full, so not really much of any indication. The Swift and the Lufthansa flights were pretty full, except going out in June. The flight from LA to Munich, I guess. We went through Munich. Was half empty. I say that we're probably barely break even on that one.
One more personal question. I know that this is a public forum, but one personal question. What I've heard is recently is that United Airlines requires you to download an app and answer questions and have a QR code on your cell phone. But I have a flip phone, and I was wondering, and I was arguing with my wife, saying, "No, they have to allow it on the computer," and she said, "They don't allow it on the computer." Have you had to use your cell phone to access to get on to United flights?
Not particularly United. We didn't have any problem with the United flight because, like I say, it was Chicago to Fresno. But there was what do they call it? PLF, I think it is, or PFL, a document that we had to have prepared for entry into Greece, or really into the EU in general. And that we had to do online beforehand, and then it would download this QR code thing. So I was able to use that and make it work.
So my experience flying in the United States from Canada is they did not care about my COVID test. They didn't require me any kind of QR code. All they wanted was the attestation that said I don't have COVID. They did, and I talked to a lot of other people, and they're like, "Yep, that's all we experienced." Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't happen again. That was coming out of Pearson. Now, coming back into Canada, we do have an app that we're required to put our information on. You could get away without the app, but it just is designed. They really want that information. They might order you into quarantine for 2 weeks if you don't have it.
Yeah.
Well, does your wife have a smartphone, Flicker?
Yeah. We both do.
She doesn't know. Oh, sorry. My wife has a smartphone, but she doesn't know how to use it. So,
okay. Well, between the two of you, I think you could download the app and get all your information registered on it, and that would work.
Well, and a friend of ours actually lives on his smartphone, and he didn't know how to actually download the app and operate it. So he had to go to his IT professionals at work and get them to do it for him. I don't know.
Yeah, well, in our case, they emailed us the document, and that included the QR code with it. So once you open the attachment, it's a PDF, and it's right there. So fortunately, we did not have any hassle going or coming.
That's good.
Could have been, obviously. But
yeah.
All went well.
Well, I'm glad.
You and me both.
Yeah.
So Franco's, before we move on to something else, Franco just has one last question. Can you discuss the difference between living in a country and touring in a country?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences. You start off, first problem is the language, of course. And a lot of people who, whether they go on a tour or not, are under the impression that they should learn some of the language. Well, of course, they learn a little bit badly, and then they encounter a native, and they say something tafadali, anything like that, and the person automatically assumes that you speak their language, and they respond to you, and you don't know what they're saying. So it generally works out better not to attempt it. Living, for the most part, it's been Greece that we have lived there, and not a heck of a lot different from living here. The grocery stores are good. All the things you need. It has gotten to a point. It wasn't always this way, but it has gotten to a point where you can find everything you need in the stores. You hardly need to pack anything. So it's really hard to see a difference other than the language and other than what's on TV.
If I could ask another question about Greece before we move on. A few years ago, Greece was in the news because of economic conditions and having to repay debts that they couldn't repay and so forth, and having to refinance. Is there any economic difficulty in Greece these days, or everything seem to be normal and happy and flowing?
For the most part, things are pretty normal. There was some real economic difficulty there for a while. You'd go around and you'd see probably every other storefront was vacant for rent, for sale, that sort of thing. But it has picked up quite a bit. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what they have done to smooth that over, because obviously they had borrowed an enormous amount of money. We're deeply in debt, but it was for a lot of infrastructure. You know, we love that word right now, don't we? But really, it was for infrastructure. For example, there's a highway they call the Ignatia, which really stretches from the west coast of Greece, northern Greece, all the way through Thessaloniki and on into Constantinople or Istanbul. Thing is a beautiful piece of work, and especially it goes through a mountainous region to the west of Thessaloniki, and it is just it's a marvel, because it's just one tunnel and bridge after another. It was tunnel bridge, and it's all modern construction, very good. The traffic moves very quickly. It used to be this stretch, and we had traveled over it back in the day, when it was just a winding 2-lane mountain road, which you inevitably ended up following some big truck slowly up and down the hills for hours. I mean, the trip could take like 12 hours to make what you could cover in 3 or 4. But that's pretty much where most of that money went to. There are a lot of modernization like that. Also the Ontario, it really should be pronounced Ontario, but the bridge across the straits is a marvelous bridge. It's an amazing thing to see. If I were doing a dog and pony show, I'd show you videos of going across the bridge and all that sort of thing. But anyway, they did a lot of infrastructure. In the most recent one, I'm kind of a train nut, so we took the train from Thessaloniki to Athens and back this summer. I had made that trip 2 or 3 times before. This year, they had literally rebuilt the route. There's a mountainous stretch that was pretty slow, and they had just literally replaced it with tunnels that all double tracked and perfect, all electrified. You know, at least they're spending the money on something worthwhile. I don't know if they'll ever pay it back, but that's another story. But things seem to be in pretty good shape. There's obviously a lot of people with a lot of money, so it can't be all bad.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I remember reading about the finance minister brought in, and every day he'd be like, "Okay, have we finally got all the money bucks?" And like, turns out, boss, we do have like this $10 million over here that we don't know about. It's like, what? But we just spent all day yesterday. Find out what you promised me. There's no more money lost.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was just going to ask, where were you born, and what was it like growing up there?
Well, I was born in San Francisco in 1941, just shortly before we got into World War II. I lived there until I was about 10 years old. So it was just the standard kid stuff, but different from the attitudes we have today, because I could wander around most of the neighborhood without having anybody chasing after me, worried about whether I was going to be kidnapped or whatever. Example, when I was 10 years old, my grandmother gave me a membership to the Y, and this is back when the Y was straight. Now, we lived out in the Mission District. I don't know how familiar you might be with the way San Francisco is laid out, but every, Tuesday afternoon, while I had this membership, I would take the streetcar to downtown San Francisco by myself, come back by myself, and nobody thought a thing about it. These days, people don't seem to be willing to let their kids out, even so much as on the sidewalk in front of their house. Very different attitude.
Will come and arrest you. If you do, the cops will come and arrest you because neighbors will call.
Yeah. Things were much freer than that way. There were still the problems. Over the hill from us was a Dolores Park, which was it's still kind of a popular park. It's there, but I can remember one time when they found some bum that had been stabbed and pushed under the bushes. So things like that happened, but it just wasn't the same attitude. San Francisco now, I go to downtown San Francisco, and it is filled with so much of the street people stuff. Sometimes I want to grab them and by the collar and say, "Who the hell are you? And what did you do with my city?" And it's a completely different atmosphere. They've done some nice things down around the waterfront. That's very enjoyable down along Market Street. But there's a lot of San Francisco that has been really messed up. Don't go there very often. But
I think the best way was it's just like I wouldn't blame the people like that are there. It's like the people are running the show, but it's like they're trying to. Someone's like when the recall was happening, and a friend of mine turned out her husband's sister ran for the Democrats in like Orange County, and they're talking about things, and they were not happy that I was like, "You're supporting. You think that recalling the government is a good thing?" And I'm like, "Well, they're turning the state into Brazil, complete with favelas." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "You know about the fact that people are illegally allowed to steal up to $1,000?" They had no idea.
Yeah. My attitude on the whole recall was not so much that Newsom needed to be removed. To me, he's just a pretty boy politician with no real attachment to reality. But what California really needs and needed in that recall was a wake-up call. The coastal Democrats really need to remember that they're not the whole state. They're not the whole of the state. And predictably, they've been running amok, doing all sorts of bizarre things. Just California is very divided, like much of the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the fact that you're into trains. How did you get into that particular hobby?
You blame that on my father. He dabbled at model railroads when I was young, and I got involved with it with him. I've always been interested in them. Part of my wallpaper here is the here, I'll show you. That's my wallpaper. It tells you something. That locomotive is Southern Pacific GS4, the 4449. This is the same one that was used for the Freedom Train back in '76. But that Southern Pacific ran a name train called the Daylight from San Francisco down to LA, and then they ran a matching train from LA to San Francisco on a daily basis, and been called the most beautiful train in the world and so forth. Really kind of dramatic appearance. I remember riding it when I was probably 8 or 9, because my parents came from Atascadero, and we would go down there occasionally. So I can remember riding with him back to San Francisco with my mother, and then that picture I took myself they brought it back to Michigan in 2009, I think it was, for a rail fair. And so you go ride that thing, and then they get to some point where they've got a nice picturesque spot, and the train backs up, and then it comes charging through with the whistle blowing and smoke all over the place, and then it stops, backs up, and does it again, and everybody takes pictures. There's probably 10,000 copies of that picture. And, it's entertaining. That one was also where I saw the locomotive that would be known as Père Marquette 1225, which happens to be the Polar Express locomotive, or the one that the Polar Express was modeled on.
Do you know how steam engines work? Because I always wondered, do you have to keep a constant pressure in the boiler, or do you actually have to put more coal in to increase the pressure to, say, go up a grade or to increase the speed?
Yeah, well, the way it's going to work out, it would depend on the terrain, downhill, level, uphill, and the answer is yes. You have to increase it's not so much increase the pressure, but you're using up the steam. A locomotive like that will use 10,000 gallons of water in the space of 50, 60 miles. They'd have to stop about every 50 miles to take on water, and actually carried more water than fuel. This one is an oil-fired locomotive. So, yeah, the fireman's job then, his responsibility is to keep the pressure up, and he has to anticipate and know the route. So they come to a grade, he knows they're coming to a grade, so he'll start cranking up the fire to increase that, because what's going to happen is, as it goes, it's using up the steam, and the water is dropping. He's got to make sure more water comes in, so on and so forth. Driving a steam locomotive is kind of an art. Diesels are all science. Steam is pure art. Art in motion, if you will.
So the tube on that looks like the bulk of a steam locomotive is actually only a portion of that is the boiler. The rest of that is a water supply? No.
What you see behind you, let me pop that picture up again, just for reference sake. All right. So what you see over here, this segment is what they call the tender. That carries the fuel and the water. Now, of course, the engineer's cab is back there. Then all of this is a combination of firebox and boiler. The firebox will extend up to, about there. And then there are hundreds of flues which are tubes inside there that the hot air passes through that heats the water in the boiler. And that passes out into this front section, which is the steam chest. All right, I mean the exhaust chest, and that is some of the locomotives, like the one that Union Pacific recently revived, 4014, big articulated, half again as long as that one. And the bigger the locomotive, the more you want to power, the bigger that boiler has to be, literally to have the capacity to provide the steam. Because if you think about it, those cylinders are, say, I don't know the exact dimensions on these, probably about 20 by 24 inch, something like that. And every time they move back and forth and move one way or the other, they will take that volume of steam under pressure to move it. So they're sucking steam out of the boiler at a pretty rapid rate.
Wow. Well, thank you.
A pleasure. Always
Have
a
you
pleasure.
ever played any of the rail games that are out there, or just only interested in the?
I have not done that. I know there's a railroad simulator available, but I've never gotten into that. And I like trains. I'm particularly fascinated by steam. Into the history of railroads and so forth. But watching trains is like watching paint dry, especially now. Big diesel goes by, all the rumbling and so forth, and then you spend the next 15 minutes while one auto rack or one boxcar or something the other. A lot of them are unit trains, and they just go rumbling by. And then after a while, I mean, you could take video of that and you could splice it together and just make it an endless train. And I know there's people that would watch it. So.
The rail games that me and my friends would play would be these games like we call 1838, 1816. You would be like railroad barons creating your rail empire.
Yeah.
And there was one set in Canada, and the Canadian one was the most fun because we got to do all sorts of like shenanigans with government money.
Yeah, the railroad history is pretty colorful, especially back before 1900.
One of the things that got me was that reading books from the 1800s is that they often have millionaires or very rich people, and they have their own cars or a series of cars that they just drive. They just sort of order the car to go to point A to point B, just like they would fly a plane today. But they actually had stewards and cooks and so forth in their little 3-car trains hook up. It was pretty cool.
One of the most famous examples of that was actually back in the 40s and 50s. A guy named Lucius Beebe. And I think he wrote a column for the San Francisco Chronicle, but had somehow become fairly wealthy. And he had his own private railroad car and loved to ride it across the country, did that frequently. You can still do that. There are people who own railroad cards, and they will charter them to you and provide you personnel to handle them while you're on it. So you'll see them occasionally. If you watch, for reasons unknown, Amtrak decided to jack up the rates that they charge to tow these things around substantially. So maybe it's kind of backed off a bit, but yes, it's still available. And then the other thing you'll see once in a while, the railroad executives will take an inspection train around. And I know Union Pacific has one car. The tail end of it is just one big plate glass window so that they can look back at the track they're passing over. I presume that railroad executives have to take the train if they're going from point to point that doesn't the railroad reaches. I don't know what the rules are on that, but you do see that fairly often. I've seen them a couple of times.
Yep, I'm looking at the websites right now.
Yeah, you'll find a number of live streaming webcams on railroad points. Probably the one that most interested me, I found this summer, it's actually in Holland, in the Netherlands, at a rail crossing there, just coming out of Amsterdam, and the amount of rail traffic is just astonishing. It's like every 4 or 5 minutes there's a train, and it's almost all passenger. But when it's a freight, they're really moving. It's astonishing. They just go banging through there.
Oh, you must be taking the train through Europe. I'll tell you, I grew up taking the L in New York City, but the best train ride I ever took was from Rome to Palermo. And we had a couchette, and we had a private sink and a bed. And we even crossed over from mainland Italy to Sicily in the middle of the night, and we slept through it. We had to take barges. The trains are actually put on barges. And so
I've heard about that one. Yeah, it's a night train. You go overnight on a barge. Yeah.
But the rooms were polished wood, and it was just marvelous. It was I guess it was old world. I don't know if they still do it today. I guess they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of that is still there. The one that's interesting is the modern version, the Orient Express. I saw that once when we went to Italy, Venice. Yeah, it was in the yard there. So we actually talk about writing something.
Sure, we can talk about that. Or you mentioned you have a blog, and we were talking about that right before the show. Want to tell us more about that?
Well, as I kind of indicated in that, I started it to give me a platform to rant, but for the most part, I have not done a lot with it. You've seen how much I put out there. I don't post very often to it. I don't treat it like a diary like some people's blogs are. Just I get on a subject and I really want to think my way through it, and writing it down is a good way to do that. So it started out that way, but the reality is two things happened. One, I discovered Ricochet, and it's much safer to post there. I am constantly wondering when somebody's going to discover some scurrilous thing that I've written, and all hell's going to break loose. But so far that hasn't happened because most people don't read my blog anyway. But of course, then they just came to the conclusion that in reality, blogging about, especially about political things, issues, the sort of things that we typically write about on Ricochet, is kind of almost pointless. For one, I'm out here, I'm far removed from any of what's really going on. I don't have any real way to get inside information, so I can't really contribute anything. I can just express my opinion about it. And there's a bazillion people doing that. So it's kind of like, okay, so I put my teaspoonful of water in the ocean. But I do that. It just gives me a place to post a few things. Now, what I have started doing this summer, as a kind of an addition to that, and my intent is to include it as part of the blog. I've started a newsletter, but it's not on a regular basis, and it is based on the fact that in the course of my life, I've taken probably 40,000 plus pictures, mostly after I got a digital camera, but it is just an enormous body. Most of it is just dreck, but it's largely been disorganized. So I've been going through trying to organize it, and in the process, I have to sort it out by subject. So I decided I would share those pictures with some of those pictures anyway with other people or people that know me, and so that'll come along. I'll get it there.
What you really need to do is drag all your friends over, put all your pictures in the slide projector, and start taking a few. Yeah.
I remember doing that the first time I went to Greece. I had taken about 12 rolls of film, which was unusual for me, but it was Greece. I didn't know when we'd ever go back there. It turns out frequently, but that was another story. And so we go over to my parents' house. I drag out my projector. I'm putting these things on, and somewhere after about slide number 350, I start seeing yawns, and so we pretty well wrapped it up. It is that can be kind of disappointing because, for the most part, people aren't interested in your pictures. A few of them, yes. You have to be pretty selective when you do that. Be able to tell a story with it. I also do video. You find a few of my pieces on YouTube, but both in the video and the pictures, if you're making a presentation, you have to keep in mind you're telling a story. It's all about telling a story. And if you got a story, if you got a good story, then it's interesting. If you don't, it's here's Aunt Mabel in front of the lamppost. Here's Uncle John in front of the lamppost, and on and on down the line like
Just
that.
a picture of the lamppost.
Yeah.
Well, I figured I did a little math, and if you post 400 pictures a year, that you've got enough pictures to last you 100 years, and that's enough time. That's really enough time to build up quite an audience.
Yeah. Just think about how long it'll take me to go through all of them.
Yeah.
I've been struggling with that for quite a while. Oh, at any rate.
Okay, well, I think we'll try. We've been talking nearly an hour now. That's usually a good time for one of these shows to go for. We'll try going out on one of our classic questions. How did you find Ricochet? Where did you discover this thing?
I don't recall exactly, but I was for a long time, going back into the 90s, a subscriber to Weekly Standard. Then, of course, when Trump came along, Weekly Standard just blew up. And then I began rummaging around. I started subscribing to National Review, and somewhere along the line, that also led me to Ricochet. And then, so I decided to subscribe to that because I liked the fact they were offering on National Review, on that National Review Plus forum, the ability to comment. Well, that's nice. I don't know if anybody reads those comments. And a lot of it just didn't really pan out to be as effective as they thought. But Ricochet, at least, is a place where I can post something substantial, and which I do once in a while.
I remember National Review Plus having that, and I think they were trying to be like, because Ricochet came before that, I think they were trying to copy the Ricochet model, but the problem is that they didn't. What makes Ricochet so great, it's a community. So you can know people, you can be friends with people there, and you can like get that whole community interaction, like the show and like all the comments and all the other like groups and everything else that you get from it. Whereas this National Review didn't have the ability to kind of curate, I think, in the same way that we naturally curate here.
Well, one thing that is a change that I'm sure you've noticed over the years, say back in the 90s, if you emailed one of the writers on National Review, Weekly Standard, any of those, you were likely to get a response, unless you were just really obnoxious, I'm sure. Now, they've completely walled themselves off from everybody. And not just National Review. This is a general problem. Corporate America in general has walled itself off from its customers. Go back in my blog and look for the one about the traveling hat, and you'll see what I mean.
I know what you mean. Like it used to be like there was that function on Weekly Standard, email the commenter, and I had several interesting emails from Jay Clarke, and I even got an email on Bill Crystal.
Yeah.
So what's your blog? How do I access your blog?
It is Pepper and Vinegar, all one word, pepperandvinegar.blog.
Okay.
It's not well structured. I'm using that one service. I can't think of the name at the moment. And I'm supposed to be able to get this continuing menu, but what you end up having to do is go to the latest one and then just keep linking back and back and back until you find the one you want. I suppose I should pay some more money and get a better structure, but I haven't done that yet. I need to revisit it, but one of these days I will.
Well, I'll check it out.
Okay. Well, that's.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out Flickr's performances in the future.
Okay.
Yes, goodbye right now. I'm waving goodbye.
Okay.
And we had Franco in the chat, which was a lot of fun interacting with him too and answering his questions. So hopefully we'll get more in the future. Anyways,
all right.
Thanks for coming in. Bye.
Great. Thank you.
Bye now.